I'm a great believer in the fact that you should never give up on a good idea, and I guess the best example of that in wall-to-wall's history is Who Do You Think You Are, which I originally pitched as an idea in 1989. In fact, I have the slightly yellowing letters. Well, I have the original pitch letter. I'm going to have this framed at some point. Which, when we pitched it to the BBC in 1989, I have a very polite reply from Jonathan Powell, who turned it down from, shows you how long ago it was, turned it down from BBC One. Curiously, I then pitched it at Alan Yentop, who was then the controller of BBC Two, and mysteriously, I don't have a reply from Alan Yentop, so I suspect he didn't even respond. I mean, it's worth saying, I should make clear that we didn't then, I wasn't pitching it every year between 1989 and 2003, but it was an idea that kind of found its way back into the bottom drawer. And I think the reason why it didn't get commissioned first time, I think there are a couple of reasons why it didn't get commissioned first time round. One, because it was very early in the relationship between independent producers and the BBC in the late 80s, early 90s. The BBC was just opening its door to indies, and there was a level, I think it's fair to say, a level of caution bordering on distrust at the BBC of whether indies could really deliver successful shows. And the other factor is that I think genealogy was just not the phenomenon that it subsequently became. In the original pitch, there's a rather quaint line saying genealogy is the fastest growing evening class in Britain. No mention of the internet, which of course didn't even exist in 1989. So I think it's, I do believe there's no such thing as a completely, well, there are such things as completely bad ideas, I should say, and hopefully one just recognises them early on. But I think when you have a good idea, it's very possible to have a good idea which just doesn't find its time, and I think that sometimes there are bad ideas that deserve to get rejected out of hand, but there are many good ideas that get turned down not because they're bad ideas, but because they're just the timing is wrong, and so it really repays having faith in a good idea and never entirely throwing it away. I mean, I think Wall to Wall has been on Wall to Wall's coming up. Actually, next year we'll celebrate 25 years in the business, and if celebrate is the right word. And it's interesting, actually. I think we've been on quite a long journey. I mean, we're now a company that is seen as being a very mainstream production company. We have Who Do You Think You Are on BBC One. We have Long Lost Family on ITV. We have New Tricks on BBC One. We're about to make The Voice for the BBC, a big Saturday night entertainment show, but it wasn't always thus. And I think that when we started out, there only was Channel 4. I mean, it was a strange world. There were 1,000 independent producers and one broadcaster, which is not a great place to be if you're a seller. And I think for a long time, Wall to Wall was. We were a bit like those rock bands that you read about who are incredibly, who are incredibly sort of well regarded within the music business, but sadly don't sell any records. I had a friend at university, a wonderful guy called Paul Buchanan, who's a singer, who has a band called the Blue Nile. And the Blue Nile are a band where if you talk to musicians love the Blue Nile. They, people like Sting, they're one of Sting's favourite bands ever, and so on and so forth. But actually, Blue Nile have never sold that many records. They're sort of too cool for school. And I think, the first sort of decade of Wall to Wall, when Jane Root and I ran the company together, I think we were a little bit like that. There were jokes in broadcast about how we, used to only ever wear black, and sort of, and we were kind of, we hung out in Kentish Town, and sort of, we were, and the truth is, I don't think any of us wanted to be like that, but we sort of, we were slightly trapped in that sort of kind of cool environment. But then, I mean, I always had an ambition. I always felt if you want to work in television, you should be in the mainstream. And I think we then spent, I mean, the sort of second decade of the company, the first part of that was spent really knocking on the door of the mainstream. We started getting more shows away with Channel 4 and BBC Two. It started to be more popular. And I guess the breakthrough show for us then was a show called The 1900 House on Channel 4, which was a kind of the first real breakthrough living history show, and a show which kind of did 3.5–4 million viewers on Channel 4, which was a big number for them. And that really shifted wall to wall into a different space. That's about just over 10 years ago. And then a few years later, we had Who Do You Think You Are commissioned for BBC Two, which actually was an even bigger success on BBC Two than 1900 House had been on Channel 4. And then I think when Who Do You Think You Are moved to BBC One, and we started to regularly get audiences of 5 or 6 million, that was where people woke up to what we could do, I think. And I think we were always I've always felt that television, the key to success in television is understanding what the medium can and can't do. Television's a really crap medium for certain things. It's not actually very good at facts. It's not very good at complicated ideas. If you want to get complicated ideas across, it's probably better to write a book than make a television program. That's not to say that television shouldn't do complicated ideas. I think it should. It should try. It shouldn't give up on that. But the reality is that if you want to work with the grain of the medium as opposed to against the grain of the medium is very good at certain things. It's very good at human narrative, very good at human stories, very good at narrative generally, very good at emotion. And I guess that one of the things that we've done is taken traditionally quite dry subjects like history, and allied them to ways of telling stories that play to the strengths of the medium. So Who Do You Think You Are? Classic example, you take history, but you put it through the prism of a human journey, a human narrative. Who Do You Think You Are works at several levels. It's a personal journey, it's like a great railway journey of the world, but it also functions like a Miss Marple mystery with twists and turns and sort of surprises. And I think that's the key for me, is about understanding ways of telling stories that play to the strengths of the medium. It's quite strange actually to see, I'm thrilled to say we've won the Televisual peer poll for the last 3 years running. And someone was asking me, why does Wall to Wall win the peer poll? And I said, well, absolutely no idea, but it's a very nice thing. I suppose what we have, in some ways it's not really complicated. I think we've always been a company driven by the idea. And I've always believed that you shouldn't have to choose between quality and success. I've always believed that you shouldn't talk down to the audience. I've always believed the audience will come and find really good programming. And I guess, we're a company that has a reputation for innovation. A company's reputation for taking quality seriously. We're quite demanding of ourselves in terms of what we do, and that we're a company that cares about the people. I suppose the third and most important thing is, I sort of believe that television, that work should be fun. I sort of believe that you spend a lot of time at work. At least I would think half your waking hours. And sadly, in television, sometimes rather more than half your waking hours. So I sort of believe that it should be fun. And part of making it fun is about doing things. I sort of believe that people want to be well paid, and they want decent working conditions, and they want but above all, they want to feel that they're doing something meaningful. They want to feel that they're doing something interesting, that they're doing something that is challenging and trying to kind of break new ground. So in some ways, I suppose we've, of course, the truth is, I think lots of our competitors are doing that too, and I think that, the other thing I'm pretty passionate about is the independent sector as a whole. I think the independent sector, I spent a long time sitting on Pack Council, and I was a sort of passionate, if you like, trade unionist on behalf of the rights of independent producers, and I love the independent sector, and I think that. What you see in the independent sector is that it's an intensely competitive business. We'd all take the bread out of one another's mouths if we had the chance. We'd all kill for one another's commissions and kill for one another's success. And yet I think because it's so competitive, there's an incredible camaraderie, really, among independent producers. And I love that. I think there's a tremendous mutual respect. I think if you've spent any time, as I have, in my case, a quarter of a century running my own production company, it's really hard work. It's really difficult. And so I sort of take my hat off to anyone who, it doesn't really matter what they're doing, just the fact that people have survived, let alone continue to make great shows, I think is a real testament. So I love that. I love that sense that there's a kind of intense competition and yet a kind of deep mutual respect, for that we have for one another.